Michael Anderson was obsessed with testing people's honesty. He'd leave expensive watches around his Manhattan hotel, Rolex in the bathroom, Louis Vuitton bag in the spa. Whoever failed disappeared. Whoever passed got promoted. That April afternoon, he left his most valuable test yet. A $500,000 Patek Philippe watch on table 7. Then he hid behind a marble column to watch what the young waitress would do. Emma Williams approached to clean the table. She saw the watch, and Michael expected greed, or honesty, or indifference. What he got was something he'd never seen in all his tests. Emma picked up the watch with trembling hands. She sank into the chair, and she started sobbing, clutching the watch like it was a sacred relic. Her fingers traced the inscription on the back. James Williams, 1975, with infinite love. That was her father's name. The watch her father sold 20 years ago to save her dying mother. The last thing he owned before his heart gave out from grief. Michael stood there frozen, because he'd bought that watch 20 years ago from a desperate man in the rain. And inside that watch was a secret that would prove Emma's father was his father's business partner, that her family owned half his empire, and that his uncle had murdered, betrayed, and stolen everything. In the luxurious restaurant of the Plaza Hotel in Manhattan, a $500,000 Patek Philippe watch lay abandoned on the polished mahogany table. Michael Anderson, a 45-year-old millionaire obsessed with testing his employees' honesty, watched, hidden while young waitress Emma Williams approached to clean the table. It was the third test that week, the umpteenth trap to unmask potential thieves. But when Emma saw the watch, instead of pocketing it or calling the manager, she sank heavily into the chair and burst into tears, clutching the watch as if it were a sacred relic. Her trembling fingers caressed the inscription on the back, while silent sobs shook her shoulders. Michael remained petrified behind the marble column. In all his tests, he had seen greed, honesty, indifference, never this visceral reaction. He didn't yet know that Emma had recognized the watch, identical to the one her father had sold 20 years ago to pay for the treatment that would save her mother's life. And the engraved name confirmed the impossible. That watch was the same one, and Michael Anderson was the man who had bought it. But there was a secret buried in that watch that would overturn everything both believed they knew about their own past. The New York spring painted the Plaza Hotel interiors with golden light as Michael Anderson crossed the lobby of his hotel. The heels of his Italian shoes resonated on the Carrara marble like the tick-tock of an expensive watch. At 45 years old, he possessed a hotel empire that extended throughout America, built brick by brick with ruthless determination. The Plaza Hotel represented the pinnacle of his success on Fifth Avenue, where spending one night cost a common worker's monthly salary. But behind the impeccable facade, Michael hid an obsession that had consumed him for 7 years. The betrayal of his business partner, whom he considered a brother, had left deep scars, emptied accounts, stolen clients, falsified documents. Since then, trust was a luxury he couldn't afford. He had developed the dreaded Anderson test, valuable objects strategically left throughout the hotel like invisible traps. A Louis Vuitton bag in the spa, a Rolex in the bathroom, stacks of bills in the hallways. Those who failed disappeared. Those who passed were promoted but remained under eternal surveillance. His mental register cataloged every reaction. The receptionist who returned $3,000, now manager. The bellboy who pocketed a watch, fired instantly. The Astor restaurant shone like the crown jewel of the plaza. 2 Michelin stars, walls lined in imported Italian silk, baccarat crystal chandeliers. The New York elite closed million-dollar deals between Napa Valley wines that cost a fortune. Emma Williams had caught his attention from day one. 28 years old, natural graceful movements. During the interview, she had asked why a man of his position personally interviewed a waitress. The audacity veiled in respect intrigued him. Economics graduate from Columbia University with honors, credentials wasted serving tables. But it was her daily behavior that fascinated him. She treated the retiree with the special coffee, the same as the businessman with Dom Perignon. She shared generous tips, worked overtime without pay. She knew every cleaner by name. Once he saw her console a widow crying on her husband's anniversary, bringing her cake with a candle. Too much perfection. She was hiding something. It was time to test her. That April afternoon, New York awakened from winter lethargy. Michael entered at 3:47 p.m. Time calculated to find the dining room in the limbo between lunch and dinner. He sat at table 7, the corner one with a view of Central Park. He opened his laptop with theatrical gestures of an overwhelmed executive. For 40 minutes he played his role, fake calls, frantic typing. He took off the Patek Philippe Calatrava in rose gold worth $500,000, left it on the table, put it back on, each movement calculated to draw attention to the valuable object. At 4:23 p.m., the crucial moment. After a fake call about an urgent meeting, he accidentally dropped the napkin over the watch, partially covering it. He stood up abruptly and rushed out. But instead of leaving the hotel, he hid behind a pink marble column. The Baroque mirrors offered him a perfect view of table 7. His heart beat hard, not from the watch's value, but from the adrenaline of the test. These experiments on human nature confirmed his cynical view of the world. Minutes passed slowly. Finally, Emma came out of the kitchen pushing the chrome cart. She cleaned table 5, then 6, approached 7. She picked up plates and silverware with mechanical efficiency. Then she lifted the napkin, her body paralyzed as if electrocuted. For eternal seconds, she remained motionless, staring at the watch. Michael saw her shoulders rise and fall in agitated breathing. Emma looked around with abrupt movements, desperately searching for the owner. What happened next left him completely off balance. Emma took the watch with infinite delicacy, as one handles a sacred relic. She let herself fall into the chair, her legs giving way. With trembling fingers, she turned the object, caressing the face. When she flipped it to read the inscription on the back, her face contorted in pure pain. Tears began to fall silently while her lips formed mute words. She pressed the watch against her chest, her body shaken by sobs she desperately tried to stifle. Michael watched, paralyzed. In years of tests, he had seen disguised greed, calculated honesty, studied indifference. Never this raw, visceral, authentic pain. Emma stood up suddenly, searching frantically, not to flee, but to find the owner with urgency that surpassed professional duty. Unable to remain hidden, Michael emerged. Emma saw him and ran toward him, almost tripping. Her face streaked with tears, she held out the watch with trembling hands, asking how it had come into his possession. The question, loaded with incomprehensible emotion, caught him off guard. Michael revealed he had bought it 20 years ago on Madison Avenue. The effect was devastating. Emma seemed to crumble, whispering that the inscription, James Williams, 1975, with infinite love, was her father's. The grandfather's watch, sold to pay for treatment in Boston. The story emerged between tears. The mother with terminal cancer, the father selling everything. The watch was the last sacrifice. James came home crying, the first and only time. The mother miraculously survived 15 more years, but the father died 6 months later. Heart attack, the doctor said. Emma knew the truth. He died of grief for breaking the generational chain. Michael listened with growing unease. For 20 years, he had worn that trophy of his first luxury, symbol of his ascent. He never thought about the pain it represented. When he offered to return it, Emma refused firmly. Her father chose for love. Recovering it would betray that sacrifice. The young woman recomposed herself with dignity, apologizing for the scene. She turned to leave, but Michael stopped her. An intuition sharpened by years of business told him there was more. A detail buried in memory emerged slowly. The memory surfaced with brutal clarity as Michael watched Emma walk away. That November day, 20 years ago, gray New York under torrential rain, he, a young entrepreneur without a penny, taking shelter in the antique shop, pretending interest in unreachable objects. The distinguished but gaunt man who entered soaked, the good-cut coat frayed at the edges, the air of someone carrying an unbearable weight. James Williams taking the watch from a velvet box with trembling hands, caressing it one last time before handing it to the rapacious-eyed antique dealer. The conversation he overheard still resonated. Urgent treatment. Experimental protocol in Boston. Last hope. The antique dealer offering a pittance. $15,000 for a piece worth. $100,000. the cruel smile while exploiting evident desperation. Michael had moved by incomprehensible impulse. $50,000, all his savings. The furious antique dealer, incredulous James, Emma's father's handshake, strong and desperate, the flight under the rain with the watch weighing in his pocket. But there was more. Moved by morbid curiosity, Michael had followed James. The man wandered under the rain like a sleepwalker, bringing his hand to his empty wrist. Then he entered St. Patrick's Cathedral. Michael followed him into the interior, smelling of incense and wax. James, kneeling before the altar, shoulders shaken by sobs, whispered prayers, petitions for forgiveness to his father for selling the inheritance. Then the strange movement toward the side chapel, the movable stone in the wall. James hiding something in the secret cavity before closing it. Michael, paralyzed by curiosity but unable to investigate. Too many problems of his own. Debts, a company to launch. Uncle Richard increasingly pressing. Now, 20 years later, that buried secret called to him. At dawn, he was in the deserted cathedral, the stone still movable. Inside the cavity, protected by plastic, documents that froze his blood. A letter from his father Robert. The father declared dead when Michael was 2 years old, but the date was 5 years after the supposed death. The devastating content. Robert alive, forced into exile. Uncle Richard, thief and assassin. The company stolen from James Williams, 50% partner. The watch contained proof in a secret compartment. The documents confirmed everything. Original partnership contracts of Anderson and Williams Enterprises. Photos of 2 smiling young men before the first property. Suspicious bank transfers. A confession signed by Richard. Michael ran to the plaza. Emma was preparing the dining room for lunch. He dragged her to his office, ignoring stares. He dumped the contents of the box onto the desk. The truth exploded like a bomb. Emma's father had rights to half the Anderson empire. He could have paid for treatment without selling anything, without dying of grief. Emma's legs gave way under the weight of the revelation. With trembling hands, she took off the watch, holding it out to Michael. But he refused to take it. Their fathers were partners, friends. The theft belonged to both. Justice, if it existed, they had to seek together. Emma looked at him through tears and nodded. For the first time in 20 years, she wasn't alone with the weight of the past. The night brought nightmares to Michael. Emma clutching the watch mixed with memories of the father he never knew. But above all, the awareness of how blind he had been tormented him. The empire over which he reigned was built on blood and tears. In the workshop of watchmaker Rodriguez, 82 years of experience, they examined the Patek Philippe. The gnarled but precise hands handled delicate tools. Rodriguez had known Emma's grandfather, a great collector. He confirmed the watch had been masterfully modified, half an hour of meticulous work, then the imperceptible click. A section of the back opened, revealing a tiny compartment. Inside, a microfilm rolled carefully. The vintage reader projected overwhelming evidence on the screen. Original documents, evident falsifications, photos of Richard with criminals. But above all, a detailed confession. The brother drugged, locked in a psychiatric clinic, declared dead. James threatened, the family under constant blackmail. The phone rang. The head of security warned that Richard was in the building. He knew about the watch. He was coming up with 3 thugs. The past claimed its tribute. The encounter was electric. Richard, at 70 years old, still emanated power and threat. He recognized Emma with a flash of panic quickly suppressed. He laughed at their naivety. Robert was alive, comfortably locked up in a facility upstate. He believed he was Napoleon, incurable. When he threatened Emma, as he had done with her father, Michael lost control. The punch came instinctively, breaking his uncle's nose. The bodyguards moved but stopped. From the door, a new voice. Are you enjoying this story? Leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Now let's continue with the video. Robert Anderson, alive after 20 years. Behind him, the FBI. Father and son looked at each other across 20 years of lies. Michael saw his aged reflection. Same eyes, same determined jaw. The word dad came out choked. More question than certainty. Robert nodded, eyes bright with repressed emotion. As the handcuffs closed on Richard's wrists, Robert told everything. Dr. Martinez, paid to keep him sedated, had confessed on his deathbed. Names, dates, crimes. The district attorney had been investigating for 6 months. The watch documents had closed the circle. Robert knelt before Emma, taking her hands with infinite delicacy. James had been his best friend, the most honest man he knew. Remorse for not protecting him had consumed him for 20 years. The story of captivity was a nightmare. Drugs that clouded the mind, rare windows of lucidity, pretending to believe himself Napoleon to survive. The gardener Thomas, who brought newspapers in secret. Following Michael's life from afar, pride and desperation mixed. James had managed to see him once, pretending to be a sanitary inspector. He revealed the watch's secret, made him promise to protect Emma. 20 years later, the promise was fulfilled. In the following days, the Anderson empire trembled. Camped journalists, scandalous headlines, the name dragged through mud. But Michael didn't care. He was recovering 20 years of lost conversations with his father. The first official act was to recognize Emma's rights. Before a notary, half the empire became William's property. Emma was overwhelmed, wanted to refuse. But Robert reminded her of her father's dreams: hospitals, schools, social projects. She could realize them, give meaning to the sacrifice. The illumination came looking at the exclusive restaurant. Luxury could serve a higher purpose. The idea that would transform everything was born. Trials followed for months. Richard convicted of kidnapping, fraud, criminal association. His accomplices fell one after another. The criminal empire crumbled while the legitimate one was reborn. Robert and Michael rebuilt not just a company, but a relationship. The scars were deep. 20 years of absence weren't easily erased, but love surviving time and madness was stronger than everything. Emma managed her new wealth with wisdom that astonished everyone. Instead of personal luxuries, she created foundations. The first, titled James Williams Foundation, financed treatments for patients without resources, a circle closing in the most poetic way. The restaurant project took shape slowly, not humiliating charity, but shared dignity. For every dinner sold, one offered to those who couldn't pay. Exclusivity transformed into reasoned inclusion. Michael watched Emma move in her new role with growing admiration. The waitress had become an executive without losing humanity. On the contrary, power in her hands became an instrument of good. Robert noticed his son's looks. He smiled, remembering himself with Michael's mother. Love born from the ashes of pain is the strongest. The Anderson and Williams families finally united, not by business, but by destiny. December dressed New York in Christmas lights reflecting on freshly fallen snow. The Astor restaurant shone transformed like a phoenix risen from the ashes of exclusivity. Same baccarat chandeliers, same Italian silk on walls, but completely new energy permeated every corner. Open Table had revolutionized not just the restaurant, but the entire concept of luxury gastronomy in the city. The formula was elegant in its simplicity. For every dinner sold at full price, one was offered to those who couldn't afford it. Not disguised alms, but shared dignity around the same table. The scene that December night was moving. A nurse from Mount Sinai, just off a 12-hour ER shift, savored lobster risotto beside the Mexican ambassador. A public high school teacher conversed animatedly with a fashion designer about education problems. A Moroccan family who had built a cleaning empire celebrated their eldest daughter's graduation at the same table where only the powerful once sat. Emma moved among tables with the same grace as when she was a waitress, but now as equal partner of the Anderson empire and director of social initiatives. The midnight blue silk dress, custom cut, enhanced a beauty that no longer needed to hide behind a uniform. Loose hair framed a serene face, eyes shining with satisfaction for every smile she saw on diners' faces. On her wrist shone her father's Patek Philippe watch, carefully restored by Rodriguez but with all original marks preserved. Each scratch a story, each sign of time a memory. Emma caressed it often, an unconscious gesture connecting her to her roots while building the future. Michael watched her from the bar where he sipped an 18-year Macallan with his father Robert. The whiskey burned pleasantly as he looked at the woman who had transformed not just his empire, but his soul. 6 months had passed since the day of truth. 6 months that had changed more than 20 years of lies. Robert followed his son's gaze with a knowing smile. At 65, after 20 years of chemical captivity, he still had a young man's energy. He personally supervised the empire's ethical restructuring, transforming each Anderson property into a model of social responsibility. But above all, he recovered lost time with the son he had to abandon. The evening flowed with perfect rhythm orchestrated by Maitre d'Antonio, who had embraced the new direction with surprising enthusiasm. Waiters served with the same precision as always, but now there was warmth in their gestures, pride in seeing children marveling at dishes that seemed like works of art. A silver bell rang. The signal for the night's announcement. Emma went to the center of the dining room, candlelight creating a golden aura around her. Conversation gradually faded as everyone turned to listen. With clear, emotional voice, Emma announced that an anonymous donation of $1 million had just arrived to expand Open Table to 3 other Anderson Empire restaurants: Los Angeles, Chicago, and Boston. The applause was spontaneous and warm, calloused workers' hands clapping alongside bankers' manicured ones. Michael and Robert exchanged a knowing look. Assets seized from Richard, now serving 30 years unconditional, continued generating poetic justice. Every property sold, every account unblocked, transformed into opportunities for those who never had them. Robert left his glass and gave his son an affectionate nudge. His voice had that tone of one who has seen too much to waste more time on conventions. He reminded him the Andersons had already lost 20 years to pride and fear. That he and James had dreamed of uniting the families, though they imagined corporate mergers, not sentimental ones. That love born from shared pain was the strongest. Michael left his glass with decision. He crossed the dining room as Emma finished thanking the diners. He intercepted her as she headed to the kitchen to congratulate the chef. He took her hand gently, feeling the familiar warmth of that contact he already knew well, but that still moved him. He led her toward the corner table, that same table 7 where it all began, where he had left the watch as bait in a cruel test. Now that table was occupied by the Rodriguez family, Mason parents celebrating their silver anniversary with a dinner they never could have afforded. They stopped beside the large window overlooking Central Park. The illuminated park shone in the night. Lightly falling snow created a fairy tale atmosphere. Michael took both Emma's hands in his, feeling the cold watch against his palm. The words he had prepared for months vanished. He spoke simply from the heart, about how his cruel test had transformed into the greatest lesson of his life. How she had taken his cynicism and converted it to hope. How 2 families destroyed by greed had found redemption in love. Emma listened with those impossibly blue eyes now shining with tears, no longer of pain, but of joy. When Michael finished speaking, she delicately put a finger on his lips. No more words were needed. She had always known since the moment their gazes crossed that fateful day. The kiss that followed was sweet and deep at once. It tasted of kept promises and shared future, of scars becoming bridges. Around them, the restaurant seemed to stop. Then it erupted in spontaneous applause. Paying customers and free guests united in celebration of something greater than food or luxury, love that redeems. Robert applauded louder than anyone from his post at the bar. He furtively wiped a tear while raising his glass in a silent toast. He whispered to the sky that James must be there somewhere, smiling for their families finally united, not by contracts, but by something infinitely more precious. Mrs. Carmen, 90 years of wisdom in her eyes, rose from her table and approached the couple. With trembling but firm voice, she said that in all her years she had never seen more perfect karma, a watch stolen by crime that becomes an instrument of justice, 2 broken souls recomposing together. As the evening came to its end, as diners left the restaurant with full stomachs and lighter hearts, Michael and Emma remained embraced before the window. Snow continued falling, transforming New York into a dreamscape. Emma raised her wrist, looking at the watch marking its regular rhythm. The inscription, "With infinite love," caught the light in a special way, as if the words themselves shone. It was no longer a memento of loss, but a promise of continuity. James Williams had sold that watch for love, Now his daughter wore it while building an empire of love. Michael held her tighter, breathing in the perfume of her hair. He thought of all the tests he had done over the years, all the traps he had set. He had tried to measure others' honesty without ever looking inside himself. It took a waitress crying over a watch to teach him that true treasures, family, love, integrity, aren't tested. They're recognized the instant destiny puts them in our path. The restaurant slowly emptied. Waiters cleaned carefully, preparing for the next day when other stories would interweave among those tables. Robert approached the couple, embracing them both. He whispered it was time to go, that the old must leave space for the young to build their future. Before leaving, he turned one last time. He saw Michael and Emma still at the window, two silhouettes against the city lights. The watch on her wrist caught reflections from dying candles. He smiled, thinking James would have approved. The watch had traveled through pain and deception, betrayal and sacrifice, to unite two souls destined to meet. In the silence of the empty restaurant, only the watch's tick-tock broke the silence. But for those who knew how to listen, each beat told a different story. No longer of loss and regret, but of hope and future. The Patek Philippe continued its journey through time, indifferent to the human dramas it witnessed, yet an integral part of them. Michael and Emma remained there while New York slept under the snow. Two heirs of a painful past who had chosen to transform scars into foundations for something beautiful. That Millionaire's test had ended in the most unexpected way, with the discovery that the only thing worth testing is one's own capacity to love and be loved. The watch continued its eternal tick-tock, marking no longer lost time, but recovered time. And somewhere beyond the thin veil separating the living from the dead, James Williams and Robert Anderson Sr. smiled. Their dream of uniting the families had been realized more perfectly than they ever imagined. Because in the end, love always finds its way. Even if it has to wait 20 years, even if it has to pass through the deepest pain, like a Swiss watch that keeps working despite everything, the human heart maintains its rhythm until it finds its perfect synchrony with another. If this story has touched your heart and shown you that destiny weaves plots more intricate than any Swiss watch, leave a like with all your soul. Share in the comments. Have you lived through a coincidence that changed your life? Do you believe destiny unites people through mysterious paths? Subscribe now to the channel and activate the bell so you don't miss more incredible stories that demonstrate how a single gesture of honesty can reveal buried secrets and change the course of entire generations. Remember, behind every object there's a story, and love and honesty always win, even if they have to wait 20 years to triumph.